Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our post-election political town hall. This is the event that has been put together by the New York Urban League, the New York Urban League Young Professionals, and the Buffalo Urban League Young Professionals. We really wanted to come together and have a conversation and an open dialogue about what the impact of the election results on the underserved communities that we support, and how do we make sure that we are creating an advocacy path forward and making sure that we are making the change that we want to see within our organizations and within our political space and within the world. So we have a great lineup tonight and we have amazing panels and we thank you all for being here. And I will first turn this over to the president and CEO of the New York Urban League, Ms. Arbor Wright, for some opening remarks.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking some time this evening to talk a little bit about a very important topic, and that is how this landmark election is going to have an impact on African Americans, on African American New Yorkers, and on the communities that the New York Urban League serves. This election has truly been like no other. I want to thank those individuals who worked hard, picked up phones, sent text, and made sure that people got out the vote, and they certainly did. And we all know that the Black folks that came out in Milwaukee and in Atlanta and in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania as a whole are the ones who made the difference. And even though we have a president who is still fighting against those election results, we know that it is the fact and the will of African American people who made sure that we would stand up, stand out, and show out if necessary in order to make sure that our votes could be counted in this particular election. I want to thank so much the panelists who have gathered for this conversation. I want to thank the young professionals, our wonderful partners in all that we do at the New York Urban League, the co-chairs of the Civics and Economics Committee, who worked so hard to bring together this panel discussion, Danielle and Mario, for the work that you have done in order to make this evening really special. And thank you to the panelists. I'm looking forward to this conversation because at the New York Urban League, we recently released our State of Black New York. And in the State of Black New York, we looked at a couple of key areas that are really important for New Yorkers, including economics and income, looking at health disparities, looking at educational outcomes, interaction with criminal justice, as well as looking at issues of education and also looking at housing. And so looking at those 6 different areas, we said, how are African Americans faring in this economy? And one of the statistics that came out that really struck me is that over 52% of Black New Yorkers make $50,000 or less in New York City. So we know that income inequality has a big impact on who can buy houses in this economy, who can provide for their families. And so we talk about civic engagement, not because it's an interesting hobby, but because it has a very real impact on our day-to-day lives. And so we wanted to gather this group of people today to talk about the impact of this ongoing election. We all heard President-elect Biden talk about how he would be there for African Americans. He knew that African Americans had his back, and so how we need to challenge him on how he can have his back. Some of the things that we have talked about at the national level and also at the local level is the passing of what we're calling the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We think it's important, as we saw the voting rights, basically the teeth of it, have been taken out over the course of the last 4 years. And so some of the things that they have done about voter repression would not have happened if we had the Voting Rights Act in its true intention. And so we as African Americans want to push for making sure that the Voting Rights Act, the John Lewis version of it, gets passed. As we all saw, we saw the tragic death of George Floyd, the treatment of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. And so we're asking for the George Floyd federal legislation to be passed, so that we can look at policing and make sure that police officers can't act poorly in Atlanta and just move to Chicago, that they can't, beat up somebody and show out in New York and then move to Los Angeles. And so we think it's very important for us to look at criminal justice reform as we go forward. And then obviously we're still in the midst of a pandemic. And we all know that that was the other thing that came out of our report as well, that African Americans are twice as likely to die from COVID than their white counterparts. And so we want to look at health disparities. We want to look at the rollout of the vaccine. First of all, we got to make sure it's safe. None of us are taking something that we don't believe it's safe, right? So we want to make sure that it's safe. And then once it is safe, that it's not just available at Walgreens and CVS, because Walgreens and CVS just came to our neighborhoods. So we want to make sure that there's a equal distribution of that as well. We need the president to take that on. And then lastly, obviously, in the where I started with New Yorkers, only 52% of us making $50,000 or less, that we need to talk about a stimulus package that makes sense so that New Yorkers and Black folks around the country can provide for themselves and their families. We're about to experience what may be the biggest housing crisis that we have known, just because people have not been able to make their rents for not being employed. So there's a lot for us to discuss tonight. There's a lot of strategies and suggestions. I am looking forward to hearing from this terrific panel. I'm so happy that they've come together. We believe that inequality is unacceptable. And that is the theme of this year's State of Black New York report. I know that they're going to put in the chat the link to it. I hope that you go to it. I hope you download it. I hope that you're part of those ongoing conversations, because of those inequalities is the reason why it's important for us to make sure that we have a Black agenda going forward and that we hold our legislators accountable for it as we go forward. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you. We appreciate your taking this time, and I look forward to the dialogue.
Thank you so much, Arva. Good evening, everyone. My name is Danielle Nicholson, and I serve as a co-chair of the Civics and Economics Committee of New York Urban League Young Professionals alongside Kendra Weldon. And we're just thankful to have all of the panelists and the guests here tonight as we discuss the impact of the recent election and just the future of our advocacy. I'd also like to give a special thank you to Arva Rice, President and CEO of New York Urban League, and Eunice McCoy, President of the New York Urban League Young Professionals, for their support in putting together this very important event. Our discussion tonight will be moderated by Harlem Community Advocate Mario Rosser. Mario is an economic justice organizer, technology sector leader, and millennial based in Central Harlem, as well as a member of YP. Professionally, he is a partnerships manager at LinkedIn, where his work focuses on helping startup companies grow through the platform. Mario has been a fellow in the Real Change Anti-Poverty Advocacy Program, through which he mentored and petitioned members of Congress to expand earned income tax credits. Recently, Mario was the board chair of America Needs You, a citywide mentoring initiative, which has served hundreds of first-generation college students in New York City in their searches for internships. And Mario recently declared candidacy for New York City Council District 9 Central Harlem for the June 2021 Democratic Party primary. So thank you very much again to everyone for being here tonight, and take it away, Mario.
Thank you for the introduction, and everyone, it's great to be here with you all this evening. Again, thank you, Ms. Arva Rice, for your leadership of the Urban League in this city. Thank you, Danny and Kendra, for your organizing of this panel today. And thank you to all the panelists for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate in what we hope to be a substantive and specific conversation about how we actually move our community forward. I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you. I just want to quickly go down the list of who we have on the panel. And again, thank you all for being here. On the line currently, we have Assembly Member-elect Chantel Jackson, representing the 79th District of the Bronx in the Southwest Bronx. She'll be taking her seat this upcoming January. Also on the line, we have Assembly Member Khalil Anderson, representing Southeast Queens, the 31st District. Thank you, Assembly Member. We have my Harlem brother, Mr. William Allen, representing the National Action Network, where he serves as the Crisis and Service Director in our community. Finally, and last but not least, we have Ms. Stephanie Browns-James, who is the co-founder and executive director at the Collective Political Action Committee. We're expecting some others to be joining. I don't believe that the others have joined yet. Let me just check real quick. Once they come in, I'll let them introduce themselves. But let's get into this discussion. Everyone who's on the line, I'm gonna kick this off by asking a series of questions. But as we go through, we'll have time for audience questions, and we'll leave time exclusively for that after about 30 minutes of me asking some questions. So feel free to put those in the chat, send them to me directly, and we can definitely make sure we get those asked. Thank you all for being here again. So I want to start off, and this is a question directed to all panelists, and feel free to answer this in whatever way you feel fit. In your perspective, what is included in the Black agenda? Assemblywoman Jackson, we can start with you.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for inviting me to be here. Madam President, thank you for all your leadership. What's in the Black agenda? Well, the one thing that I do know about Black people is that we're not monolithic. And me being a millennial, my mom being a Caribbean Black, we still don't even see the world the same. So for me, when I talk about my Black agenda, I'm talking about the health disparities that we're facing here in the South Bronx. We lead in the highest rates of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and asthma. So when we talk about Black agenda, health for me is number one. Second, it would be housing, making sure we have affordable housing, but also increasing home ownership. Because if we've been paying attention to the numbers, Black people in home ownership has been decreasing over the years in record numbers. And so for me, home ownership is extremely important, because that's how we create generational wealth for our young people. And then lastly is education. So I know we talk a lot about like go to college, go to school, but the truth is we need to be teaching the RBCs. And for me, the RBCs is real estate, business, credit, and stocks. Our people need to know about financial literacy, because these were things that were kept from us for so long. So when I talk about the Black agenda, it has to do with wellness, housing, and education.
Thank you, Assembly Member. Next, we can, if anyone wants to jump in, feel free. We can make this as casual as possible. So anyone want to hop in here?
Yeah, I mean, well, first I want to thank everyone, including Madam President and my colleague in government and everyone from the Urban League who put this together. I think it's vitally important that we discuss what our future looks like. And being that and we're going to talk about this a lot later, being that we save this president-elect, we need to have a strong and ambitious agenda for that administration. Our people are suffering in so many spaces and avenues. Lack of access to food needs to be at the top of the agenda. College debt that our young people and students and folks who just decided to go get an education and now are in a life and whirlwind of debt need to be the focus. Folks, as Chantel said, who are struggling to own a home, that needs to be at the top of the agenda as well. These are the things that we need to demand from this administration in the first 100 days, and any administration who claims to be committed to the advancement of Black folks. And that's why we need to make sure that this administration reflects those values in a clear-cut agenda for our people.
Thank you, Assembly Member. Brother Allen, how about we get you in here?
Thank you so much, Mario. I recognize you mentioned Black agenda, and that means that somebody must have come together and decided what that agenda is. I have some ideas of what could be those possible items on that agenda. And I think one of the greatest, most important situations for us is as a community is that we are resource rich, but we are coordination poor. And I've learned this over the last 30 years. Let me repeat that. We are resource rich, and coordination for. And I got to confirm this the last 2 years as the national crisis director of the National Action Network, a leading civil rights organization, when I had to aid in the coordination of giving out 2.3 million meals in Harlem, in the Bronx, in Atlanta, in Florida, and Los Angeles. And as folks were coming to our various sites, we got an opportunity to really talk about what's missing in our culture. And there is a huge disconnect. There's no understanding of the importance of social capital, understanding the value of your neighbor, the importance of the Black church and how it connects to our lives and our success. Our people are so disconnected that they don't realize that they already got the power. No one has to give it to them. They got it if they choose to utilize it. And when we don't use the power, others will use the power instead. And so then we begin to say them and they and those that these folks are doing to us. But I got to tell you, when we mobilize our power, we are powerful. And I've seen it. The other day I was listening, maybe in the summertime, I was listening to this elderly gentleman. He said, you know what? Our government always talk about they don't have no money for something, but yet they were able to find $600 to give out to people. So when they want to do something, they can do it. So I think if we're going to look at a Black agenda, we really got to look at how we organize our power and make no excuses for exercising our power and pursue it. This current new administration coming in, one of our big concerns is to make sure that our culture is adequately represented in those federal leadership roles. Why are we now negotiating after we already delivered? We're negotiating something that we already know that we should be getting. And so that's what I'm saying. We need to become a little bit more bold and bash as we look at this stuff. And so the young brother from Khalil Anderson, who just got elected to the state assembly, when he goes up to Albany, he should feel confident. Chantel Jackson, she should feel confident that they now are coming from communities that are beginning to understand the political connection to economic delivery. They should go up there with their heads held high. They should be able to know that they got people supporting them, that they can turn to the folks that elected them to deliver what must be done. So in terms of the Black agenda is us continuing to organize ourselves and to claim our power.
All right, thank you for that, Brother Allen. Ms. James, let's get you in here. And you're on mute, by the way. Yeah, we're still on, you're still on mute. Okay. All right, well, once you get that figured out, we'll come back to you. But we're gonna move on to the next question. Assemblywoman Jackson, we still can't hear you, Stephanie, so maybe log out and log back in. But Assemblywoman Jackson, how are you thinking about legislative strategy and coalition building to advance the Black agenda as you go to Albany in a diverse state with members of widely varying perspectives?
So the good thing is that we have a caucus, and we have the largest caucus, Black, Hispanic, Latino, Asian caucus in the nation right now. And it's a number of us. So I must say that we have the numbers, right? I can't tell you that we all have the same agenda and the same wants for our people. But what I can say is that we are working together to create legislation that makes sense for our people. For me, as a Black woman, my mindset is always about, our health, our wealth, our success. And for me, I'm going to come in with the perspective of a mom and a social worker and a Black woman from Harlem who lives in the Bronx and whose mom is an immigrant. So when I come in, my experience and my legislation may look a little different from Khalil, but I know Khalil got my back because we both care about Black people and the advancement of our people. And so things that affect us, like the Black maternal death rate, something that, you know, in a few weeks, you guys are going to see how hard I'm going for this, because there's no reason for our Black mothers to be dying at the rates that they're dying while having our Black children. So that'd be one of the things. But criminal justice is a big deal for us. You know, I personally have been affected by the criminal justice system when my life partner went away for 4 years when I was 7 months pregnant. So I know what it's like to visit Rikers and visit Bear Hill and visit downstate. I've been to a number of jails. I've seen how they run. We are pushing for halt solitary. There's no reason, if the United Nations is saying that more than 15 days is inhumane to have somebody in solitary, while people are spending 40 days, 100 days in solitary. Khalif Browder lived in my district, you know? Corey Wise is my ex-husband's good friend. My brother grew up with Antron, you know what I'm saying? So like, understand that I'm always connected to the criminal justice reform because it has affected my life since I was about 5 years old, watching Central Park 5. So even though I may be pushing hard for us to do research when it comes to Black maternal death, I will never forget my brothers and sisters that are struggling and fighting and dying in the criminal justice system.
Thank you for that moving response. Assemblymember Anderson, I also want to get you in here. You know, we heard from Assemblymember Jackson that she brings her own lived experience to bear in advocacy, right? Oftentimes we're getting pressure from our community that we are elected by, and we're going to a legislature that has sent representatives from all over the state where everyone doesn't share that same experience. So how do you think about building a coalition and being able to have those members from other areas hear you so that we're actually able to advance the Black agenda?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm willing and able to partner with any and everyone who's about moving our people forward, who's seriously about making sure that we get the wealth that we were promised, that we fight for the resources that we were promised, and we fight for the things that we demand to continue to live or to live as qualified or excuse me, not qualified, but dignified human beings in this society. And I want to just echo what my colleague Chantel said. It's, you know, these are the things that we're talking about. We're talking about Black infant mortality. We're talking about lack of access. And these are the things that we are willing and able to build coalition with. And as Chantel said, like, we're not going to always agree with some of these folks with everything. But there is always the common goal of making sure that we deliver. And so whomever is about delivery and whomever is serious about making sure that we can remove these chains off of our people. And they look very different now than they did 200, 300, 400 years ago, but we have chains on still. Whoever is about making sure that we can remove these chains, excuse me, is who we want to partner with and who we're going to partner with. And I'm looking forward to that fight.
Awesome. And thank you, Assemblymember Anderson. I'm seeing some great questions coming in on the chat, and I'm definitely going to bring all those in at the end. I have a theme of questions to get us through all this. And Stephanie, I want to go to you next. If we can hear, I still see from the sign that you're on mute. Are you able to hear us? Okay, you're still on mute. Yeah, okay. And so, Brother Allen, I'm going to go back to you. You want to get in on this question as well?
Yeah, let me hear the question again. I'm in a very noisy place, so please forgive me.
That's
I'm
okay.
I'm a part of 3 other meetings.
We giving all the grace this year to everybody. Mm-hmm. So the question was, how do you think of, on a municipal level, how do you think about advancing the Black agenda and coalition building in a city that is rather diverse? You know, there are members across the city in certain places where they hold vastly different views than the average ones of our constituents in Harlem. So how do you think about actually having other people be able to see and relate to you so you can get stuff done?
You know, Black folks didn't arrive in New York yesterday. We've been here since Revolutionary America. In fact, the first major Black business in New York City was owned by a Black man, Francis Tavern. where George Washington hung out at. And even during that period of time, there was quite a number of Black businesses at that time, and Black folks' contribution to the political and economic life in New York has not changed. Right now in New York City, Staten Island, Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, and Manhattan, out of the 5 boroughs, 4 of the boroughs are led by Black folks as county leaders. County leaders help to determine who become a judge in our city. More of our people will see a judge than they will see Khalil Anderson, myself, or Chantel. And so if we know that we have that power to select a fair judiciary in the city, then I think our people will begin to see their power. In terms of coalition building, we've always been the one that's been asked to build coalitions. And then when we didn't have the numbers, people didn't think that we was a part of the coalition. And so I say, when you got the power, lead. Put out the agenda, let folks will come along. We've been very fair people. If you look at the legislation that came out of Adam Clayton Powell, who helped to create more opportunities in schools and education, folks got a chance to go to college because of the bills that he passed in Congress or the bills that he passed in the city council. If you think of Basil Patterson and Percy Sutton and David Dinkins, when they were, Khalil, when they were serving in Albany, they created the SEEK program. They created HEOP. Okay, I mean, Black folks have been doing it. I'm like, why are we thinking that we need all these coalitions? All we have to do is be conscious and just do the right thing. And if folks are believing the right thing is being done, they will join us. But right now, Black folks got the numbers. I mean, our current mayor won because his son became his poster boy. Black folks went out to vote in that election and elected him mayor. So we have a Black family that now currently lives at Gracie Mansion. And so Black folks know that when they exercise their power, you know, they can bring about the change and they don't have to wait on other folks. Other folks can come join us. And so it's not saying that we're going to be selfish in our power as other folks have been. It's saying that once we recognize who we are and what we can do something different.
All right. Powerful response, brother. I want to get into the topic of growing Black wealth specifically. Recently, the Canadian government launched an initiative to specifically support Black entrepreneurship. We struggled to get this type of legislation done here in the States. Within the next 2 years, what can we get done in government to grow Black wealth in this city and in this state?
Well, I kind of started talking about that, right? How do we grow Black wealth? And it starts with the RBCs, right? Real estate, business, credit, and stocks, because we've been kept out of that information loop for so long. And I think that, you know, my dad, I'm fortunate because my dad is the CEO of WEBO, which is Workshop and Business Opportunity Program. Basically, they for the last few decades, they've been helping people, mostly people of color, create businesses, establish businesses, and run businesses. So this is the household that I grew up in, and I'm very aware that every Black child didn't grow up the way I did, having business-minded people in their homes. So I think at a larger scale, you know, we need to start thinking about, instead of saying reparations to people, because they're like, how are we supposed to pay Black people for, you know, for we don't know who was a slave, we don't know who the descendants are. Every white person gonna be Black all of a sudden. So instead of us talking, like saying words like reparations, because that creates a different type of thought process for people, we need to just clearly state that these are the pathways we want for Black people. These are the income-driven ways we can give to our people, and it happens through education, training, and just not just jobs that we can, you know, go work at a retail store that we just put in our neighborhood. We need jobs that we can take care of our families off of, union-based jobs. You know, we're big union people in my household. I'm UFT, my mama is DC 37, and those jobs allowed me to be able to be a homeowner and my mom to be able to be a homeowner. So those things like that is what we need in our communities.
Thank you. And I want to just introduce Senator Kevin Parker, who just joined us. Thank you, Senator, for joining. Senator Kevin Parker represents the 21st Senatorial District of Brooklyn, New York. Thank you for being here. You want to just introduce yourself and say a few words, and we can jump back into the questions after that.
No, absolutely. First of all, excuse me for being tardy. Again, I'm State Senator Kevin Parker. I'm representing the 21st District in Brooklyn, which is part of Canarsie and part of Flatlands, but principally Flatbush and East Flatbush, Midwood, Dittmers Park, Windsor Terrace, and Park Slope. I'm the majority whip in the New York State Senate, as well as the chairman of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee. And glad to once again join the New York Urban League's Young Professionals at another event, as well as my new colleagues, Dr. Anderson and and Dr. Jackson. They're very astute people. I'm very excited about serving alongside of them. I've known them both prior to them becoming elected. And of course, my Congresswoman and your illustrious CEO and President, Ms. Arbor Rice. How you doing?
All right, thank you, Brother Parker, for joining. And I'm gonna go to Assembly Member Anderson with the same question and then give you some time to hear the question. The question, by the way, was what can we do in this state to specifically support Black entrepreneurship in this upcoming session of the legislature, Black entrepreneurship and closing the Black racial wealth gap?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Senator Parker, for joining us. Looking forward to building with you as well. Look, I think that in this session, keep in mind, right, it's not just me and Chantel and Kevin who are on the call that are Black leaders within the state government. We also have the leaders of the houses, the two legislative houses that are Black folks. So if we present to these folks an ambitious agenda for entrepreneurs, for young people, for people who are just trying to create their own, they've got to follow through with it. And this is our opportunity to make sure that we hold them and everyone who share the same view as the folks who are on this call, to making sure that we push folks forward. And there are many ways to do that, right? When we're talking about veterans who served us, Black veterans, because Black veterans often fight two front wars. They go and fight abroad and they come home and fight here. We should be making sure that we make it easier for them to get licenses, business licenses here in the city of New York. We also should be looking at ways of providing seed money to people who have ideas, whether that looks like making sure that we have incubator kitchens or incubator office spaces, tech incubators, if you will, to be able to allow people to not have to pay the expenses of starting up a business. Right? It's very expensive to start up a business, but if you have certain things and spaces that they can use to incubate, they can be able to avoid those initial costs. That's how we build wealth, by giving advantages to people who otherwise would have and be disadvantaged. And that's what we can do on the state level, on the city level, and that's what we can urge our leadership to do in this moment.
Hey, Mario, if I can jump in there a little bit. The idea of small business development is absolutely critical in this moment, in this time. As you know, we're in, as we hear Assemblyman-elect talk about a two-front battle. We're in a two-front battle in our communities, one around saving lives, the other one around saving livelihoods. And so, as we deal in this kind of COVID time, we're really going to have to help people adjust, right? We expect that we're going to get a healthy stimulus package out of the federal government, particularly now that we've done our job and elected Joe Biden as president and Kamala Harris as our vice president. But we're not going to tax our way out of this. And we're going to need to raise revenues. We're going to really need to, go after the rich and corporations and ask them to pay their fair share, which they haven't to this point, right? But we're not going to tax our way out of this. And so we're going to need full-time jobs at a living wage with benefits. That's what you heard Assemblywoman Jackson talking about. And I think that when we talk about that in our communities, that small businesses are the key, right? And they're the key because most of our people actually work in small businesses. One of the things we stopped talking about a number of years ago is labor market discrimination, right? Nobody even, have y'all maybe don't even know what that means anymore because we stopped talking about it, right? We just kind of accepted the fact that we don't get hired at large white corporations, right? Unless at the most menial jobs at the lowest wages and only when they in fact need us. We've become a reserve supply of labor. If we're going to have the kind of meaningful employment that you've heard my colleagues talk about, we're going to have to produce it ourselves. It's not going to magically start automatically coming in this pandemic from white corporations, right? And so the economy has moved from Wall Street to Main Street, right? And in Brooklyn, in my community, the main streets are like Flatbush Avenue, Church Avenue, right? Utica Avenue, right? And so we're going to do two major things, and this is where the state government can help. One is provide access to capital, and the second is provide technical assistance. In our communities, getting access to capital is absolutely critical and is one of the most difficult things to do. And I'm not just talking about like the P3 loans, but this has to be some ongoing access to capital to help companies get back up and going. Right now, the national statistics are saying 25% of the white businesses that are going out, that are closing their doors during the pandemic, are not going to reopen. The numbers in the Black communities are over 45%, approaching 50%. And it's higher when you talk about restaurants, right? And so access to capital, and then technical assistance. In our community, we have people who know how to run, know who got to cook food, having a hard time running a restaurant. They can build a table, all right, can't sell furniture, right? And so when you look around the city of New York, you need more small business development centers. There are 4 of them in Manhattan, 4. The second smallest borough, 4. There's 2 of them in Brooklyn, the 3rd largest city in the entire country, right? And 1 of them in Queens, the 4th largest city in the entire country, right? And so we have to do a better job at providing that kind of technical assistance that we need to understand where money's being made. The economy did not shut down during the pandemic, right? When we locked everybody down, it just slowed down. People still made money. Amazon made money. Netflix made money, right? 3M made money, right? Grocery stores made money, right? But department stores didn't. It is that kind of analysis that needs to be done both statewide and within the context of the city, right? That will, create a base of analysis to understand where we have to put our efforts and help those companies and those firms in those different stratosphere position themselves correctly in this new economy.
Well, thank you, Senator Parker, for that. Brother Allen, I want to go to you next, but first I just want to introduce Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, who just joined us. Congresswoman Yvette Clarke represents the 9th Congressional District in the borough of Brooklyn. Congresswoman, thank you for being with us. Feel free to take a second to introduce yourself and say hello to everyone online.
Well, first of all, let me thank Arva Rice and the team at the New York Urban League for inviting me to participate with everyone this evening. I am Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke, and I represent the 9th District of New York. That's Central and South Brooklyn. Kevin Parker, his district is within my district. It's great to see him.
That's my Congresswoman.
Yeah, it's great to see him this evening. And it's great to be on this panel. I just got in from Washington, D.C., where the battle continues for human rights and dignity and for equity and justice and fairness. We will be returning to Washington, D.C. next week. We did not come to agreement on some very, very important work that has to be done before we end the 116th session of Congress. That is both a stimulus for the American people and the appropriations that keep our federal government working. So I was rushing back to get back to the district, and I'm glad to join you all this evening. Mario, I yield back to you.
All right, well, thank you for being here with us, Congresswoman. After I bring Brother Allen in here to answer the question that we had on the table, I do want to come back in. We're really grateful to have someone who's representing at the federal level, and I think the next question will really, you'll offer unique perspective on it. So Brother Allen, I want to get you in on that last topic around supporting Black entrepreneurship and closing the Black racial wealth gap.
Well, it's really important. And let me just also thank Yvette for being on. We had a great time working together in the Bronx back in the day. And certain Senator Parker and I are long-term friends. I think we both are still pursuing the same PhD. And so many of us have this long and illustrious history. And of course, I know Arva Rice. I've known her forever. We have this illustrious history. And as we begin to look at Black-owned businesses, I think of Harlem. The only block, and I sometimes have to speak of my own community. So if you was to walk down the avenues in Harlem and the crosstown corridors, the only street that you can find a plethora of Black-owned businesses, Khalil, is on West 116th Street. And the majority of the Blacks that own those businesses on that strip are African immigrants. You probably cannot find a single African-American non-immigrant really owning any business in Harlem, unless it's maybe some real estate. And so this is certainly a challenge for us. I recently wrote an op-ed piece on small business and the COVID in terms of the impact. But I think we have a crisis in our own culture when it comes to owning things. For some reason, we don't talk enough about it or really make these things happen. And it's a big concern. And you even have Black homeowners who are now also suffering too. And the threat of losing their property, whether in Brooklyn or in Harlem or in the Bronx. So I think it's a matter of folks representing the federal government, the state, the local, creating some kind of triad task force between the three entities, really coming up with some really solid solutions to address it. And I want to just add something. Someone just put in the chat. Khalil Anderson, you are so young, and I'm proud of you, but you're not the youngest in history. Calvin Austin and myself were elected to the local school board in Harlem when we were teenagers. So sorry about that. So Harlem won that race. So just want you to know the history, because sometimes when people put out history, they put out the incorrect history and then we begin to believe it. So we have to be very careful that we do our own fact checking as we celebrate the victories that we all have in some kind of way. But also with the community boards, we got a community board, and I don't know, sometimes for those of us in government, we get so tied up with so many other people that sometimes we lose our way from the folks that we serve. And it happens all the time. We get so pulled in so many different directions that we get home. So hold it. I didn't get a chance to even talk about Bed-Stuy today. I didn't get a chance to look at Crown Heights. I didn't get a chance to look at South Bronx. And it happens because we can get pulled in so many directions. I'm just hoping, since you mentioned earlier about the Black agenda, and since Kevin Parker and Congressman Clark just got on, please also remind them that early question that you asked, since they now have joined the panel, in terms of what is this Black agenda and what do they do to make it a reality for our community?
Well, I certainly will, Brother Allen, and thank you for your statements right there. I'm really enjoying the conversation. I feel like we could be on here for 2 hours. I've been on a lot of Zoom calls, but I actually feel the spirit through Zoom. I feel like this is a landmark conversation happening right now.
Brother Mario, can I make a friendly amendment to Brother William there? So I was very careful with how I shaped it. Youngest Black elected to the state legislature.
There you go. There you go.
Ever.
Claim that, brother. Claim it. My check is in the mail.
Yes. So I certainly want to talk about those federal issues. And Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, I'm going to bring you in here right now. I do want to also ask you the question that we asked everyone at the beginning, but there's something that's really pressing, and I think specifically you can offer some perspective on this. What is it actually going to take to get significant support to stabilize NYCHA in this new session of Congress?
Well, when we talk about infrastructure, oftentimes people see infrastructure as being simply roads and bridges. And what we recognize is that the investment made in public housing yields dividends, and that is part of our national infrastructure. There's an obligation that the federal government has to providing affordable housing, safe and healthy housing to the people of the United States. And so public housing on the agenda in Washington, D.C. has been placed and centered in our push for an infrastructure bill. Let me also say how happy I am that there's a woman whose name has been mentioned for a Secretary of HUD named Marsha Fudge from Cleveland, Ohio, who is very familiar with the housing crisis that exists for Americans, and particularly for Black communities. I have spoken to her ad nauseum about the challenges we face with our public housing and the challenges we face with development and gentrification. And so I think we've got the right person in the right place at the right time to center a sort of post-COVID existence in the movement for Black lives. And that means Black lives in housing. That means not only Black lives in the law enforcement, criminal justice realm, but Black lives in healthcare. It means Black lives in entrepreneurship. And what we're finding in Washington, D.C., and unfortunately it has come about because of the transparency that was brought forth during this period of COVID-19, there is an almost unanimous recognition within at least the Democratic caucus of the House of Representatives, which is in the majority, though as small as it may be, that we must tend to the most vulnerable in our society first and foremost, and that we must center them in the reparation, if you will, the rebuilding of our civil society. And so I'm optimistic because I see the recognition of all of our work coming forth in some of the picks, if you will, that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have made as we look at how to navigate this pandemic and come out the other side in a post-COVID existence that undergirds and provides a therapeutic repair to communities of color.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I actually want to stick with you real quick
Sure.
because earlier we were discussing the topic of building coalitions, yet also advancing the Black agenda specifically, right? And kind of Brother Allen made the point, hey, here in New York City, we actually have the luxury of generally having the votes due to the disproportionate size of our population compared to the nation, right? So when you go down to DC, and I know your constituents in Brooklyn, they're like, Congresswoman, let's have a Black specific agenda. But you get down to DC and these Congress members from other places don't agree. How do you think about actually getting stuff done when sometimes it's not clear that we have the votes? I mean, we have this special election in Georgia where the Senate is hanging in the balance. How do you think about getting stuff done in a divided government with very polarized views across the country?
It's very challenging, but you have to start with unity where you are. And one of the things that we have done in the House of Representatives, at least in the Democratic caucus, is we've worked on our unity, because that's the most important thing that we can do. Going into the 117th Congress, the Congressional Black Caucus will be almost a quarter of the Democratic caucus. We will be 59 strong. And so it will be important as we work through all of the challenges of this pandemic that, we build coalition, but there's recognition that nothing leaves the House and nothing passes unless the Congressional Black Caucus is in agreement. And I think that what we're finding on the Hill is that there's a willingness for the type of coalition building, because what has happened to Black communities have also happened to Native American communities, have also happened to rural communities, have also happened to Latino, Latinx communities. And so there are coalitions, there is common cause that is built as a result of that. And that's what we're building upon. We have a foundation that we're building upon. I will tell you, however, the politics in Washington, D.C., particularly the inter-party politics, it's night and day. You really, it is extremely polarized, and it's very difficult to find a common values because they're not displayed right now. And we're trying, and that's why I think the bipartisan group of colleagues that have come together to try to push forward a stimulus package is very important. However, when the values begin to diverge, that's where things are very fragile. Is you have a situation where Republicans are insisting upon liability protections for corporations, but not willing to give a direct benefit to families that have been unemployed, that are struggling to meet their necessities. And so when you have, again, we believe in the people, they believe in the corporations, it's kind of challenging right now to get to that common cause.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And we were really waiting for you to join the call so you can offer that unique perspective of spending time in DC. Assembly or State Senator Parker, I want to actually go to you on this one. As we await federal support to stabilize NYCHA's finances in this upcoming session in the state, what can we do while waiting for that in the near term?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it won't be about waiting, right? They'll kind of be working at the same time. Again, you're talking about in 2020, right? So the fiscal year in the state of New York is from April 1st to March 31st. So even though the year is ending in a timeline for us, the fiscal year we'll still be in the fourth quarter of the of the 2021 fiscal year, right? And so, we're obviously, as I indicated before, waiting for a substantial stimulus package to come from my congresswoman and her colleagues in Washington. And by the way, Congresswoman, you don't have to bring me a check. You can just bring cash. We can meet somewhere. I just, state don't need to go through all that paperwork. But so that's going to be an important part. I mean, right now we're almost, just for this year, 2020, you're talking about $30 billion worth of deficit, right? 15 billion on the state level, just for the state government. 5 billion approximately for the city of New York. Then an additional 5 billion for the transit system, right? For the MTA. And then about 2 billion around the entire each county. We have 64 counties, right? And so collectively about $2 billion that they're going to need to bail themselves out, right? And so that money coming from, that stimulus coming from the federal government is going to be really, really critical. On top of that, myself, Assemblywoman Jackson, Assemblyman Anderson are going to have to put our heads together and not just simply, talk about taxing the rich, because that's not going to get us all the money that we need. We may, in fact, need to do a round of cuts and look at where targeted cuts are going to happen in our state government that's not going to destroy the lifelines that we've built so hard over years, right? And then create some way to kind of stimulate our economy simultaneously. And so we're hoping that as it relates to NYCHA, and I grew up in NYCHA, I grew up in the Bushwick Projects in Brooklyn, that a vast majority of the funds that we will get from there will probably come right before our budget is due in April. And hopefully we'll be able to use some of that funds to apply to fixing NYCHA. But the complication, the problems in NYCHA are very, very complicated. We're talking about in excess of $18 billion to address every single NYCHA, and that's just NYCHA, right? That's not, and those of us in New York City, and this is part of what Assemblyman Anderson and Assemblywoman Jackson get used to, is that when you start, trying to address these issues, NYCHA's too big to fail. Don't get me wrong, right? There's over 400,000 people living in NYCHA. If NYCHA was its own city, it'd be the second largest city in the state of New York. There's more people in NYCHA than in Buffalo and Rochester almost combined, right? And so it's too big to fail. We have to help them out. But we also have to understand that when we're passing legislation on the state level, we're not just doing it for New York City. We're doing it for the entire state. And so as we look at how do we help NYCHA, there's public housing that have Black and Latino people living in around the state that we're also going to have to pay attention to, right? And we have colleagues, obviously, like Assemblyman Meeks, who's a new colleague up in Rochester, who's not going to let us forget. And Crystal Peoples, the sister who's the majority leader up in Buffalo, who are not going to let us forget their communities. Pam Hunter in Syracuse, right, who are not going to let us forget their communities. And so there's a lot of work to be done. And a lot of it is going to be about raising revenue, and that's going to be a really important part of it. But we also going to have to go through a process of figuring out where there is waste and inefficiency in our state government and eliminating that as we go forward. And let me just apologize to my brother William Allen. He's right. We've known each other, forever and ever. And I didn't see him on the call when I first got on. And yeah, we should talk about those PhDs at some point.
Yep. And so actually, I want to say to folks, we're going to crowdsource some questions from the audience right after this question. So instead of putting your questions in the chat, if you could actually put them in the special Q&A box, because there's a lot going on in the chat. It's real active over there. And so if you put it in the Q&A box, I will be able to see your questions and we can actually ask them that way. So please go ahead and think of your questions and put them in the Q&A box. Brother Allen, I'll actually go to you next with this next question, and we can kind of go around. We'd love to hear from everyone. We will be remiss not to speak about the next steps in criminal justice and policing reform in this year. We haven't talked about it, but that's certainly not because it's the last thing on my mind. It's the top thing. And so what do you view as the next steps in going further in reimagining public safety? We can start with you, and whoever wants to jump in after, feel free to do so.
Well, and I'm glad that Albert Rice is on because the Urban League is playing a huge role in that dialogue. And I was certainly honored a couple of days ago to be a part of a panel that included the civil rights organization in the city. I was representing the National Action Network, and the NYPD is now trying to do that. And so maybe there might be some community survey design that might allow regular citizens to have some kind of input in terms of what that might look like. Maybe there can be a contest with young people in our high schools and our colleges. Let's really get a broad level of participation of what that imagination calls for, because we're not monolithic and different communities are feeling different things, whether it's in Queens, Jamaica, Queens, or Harlem, or Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. We need to make sure that there's a lot of participation. One of the things I noticed, and I've been always talking about it, when Amadou Diallo, and I always talk about this story, when he was shot more than 40 times and killed in the Bronx in 1990, we said, this is police not really understanding our community, but there was a bit of footnote that we overlooked. And that was whether or not that community was civically engaged. And so someone did a report and collected the data and found that the community police council was dysfunctional and had not been meeting. And so the community really was not having a dialogue and a relationship with that local police. And right now, you look at these police community councils throughout New York City, I don't believe they even fund it. Someone told me, and I was trying to find it in the budget, expense budget, that they're only getting like $200 a year. I mean, how do you do community outreach to bring people to a monthly dialogue where it's not even funded? And so there might be some smaller things that we can do to make sure communities are far more engaged in their local police stations and their communities. Maybe the community boards can be more involved in the outreach on that issue and informing people, but there seems to be, there's some inexpensive things that we can get started on as we begin to work on the larger picture. The other thing I'm concerned about when we talk about the training, who are the people training the police? Has anybody seen the curriculum? How many professors do they have? What is their training budget? I haven't seen anything. And I don't think anybody on this Zoom seen anything either. So there's some other things that we need to do, some kind of inventory to actually, we need to collect all the data. You know, a good research said, you know, when you collect a lot of data to then summarize it to an abstract, we need to be able to collect all the information, because I don't think all the information has been presented. So that's where I want to start from.
Assembly Member Jackson, I see you nodding your head. Jump in here.
Yeah, I wrote some stuff in the chat, some things that we need to be considering. And I wrote in there that we need to consider requiring police to have malpractice insurance, abolishing qualified immunity, requiring implicit bias training, and residency. There's just a few of my thoughts. Like it took the death of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor for the state of New York to act and pass some really good police reform this summer. And so I hate that we have to lose Black lives in order for us to push us to a place where we're making the necessary laws to protect our people. And so, I don't want to see another Ahmaud Arbery or Khalif Browder or any of those things. And so we need to start holding our police accountable. We have to. I'm a social worker, and if I ever cause any kind of harm to a child, I'm going straight to jail. Don't pass go, don't collect $200. Like you going straight. And so I don't understand how our officers who are here to serve and protect us are able to take the life of someone, and then the taxpayer, even if we win a lawsuit, the taxpayers, us, we're paying for that. So we need to start looking at those things and adjusting those things. And if you are so scared as an officer, and you feel the need that like your life is in danger and you have a gun on you, then maybe this ain't the job for you, right? And these are the conversations we have to have. And let me be very clear that I have great relationships with a number of officers. I spend a lot of time in my precincts in my district because conversations need to happen. Also, I always tell my people, we have to infiltrate at every single level of every single system. And so we need our Black and brown officers. We need them also to be in positions of power. So there's no reason why we have a slew of Black and brown officers and none of them are in positions of power, or our women. We're not promoting our women into positions of power. And so I'm saying that we need to infiltrate at every single level of this system and consider some of the things I just talked about.
Okay. I want to keep going around the horn. Again, everyone, if you have questions, please put it in the Q&A chat so we can get those in. We'd love to hear questions from all of you all as well. Congresswoman, I actually want to hear your perspective on this if you are able to share.
Sure, absolutely. You know, we passed in Washington, D.C., the George Floyd Policing and Accountability Act out of the House of Representatives. We acted swiftly. And unfortunately, we're dealing with a Senate that doesn't share our values, right? But, that's groundbreaking legislation. There's work to be done. And that's why elections have consequences. And I am so focused on Georgia right now because we know that as long as Mitch McConnell is there, and I know this is an organization that's that is nonpartisan, but I'm sort of setting the scene of what I'm experiencing in Washington, D.C., which is obstruction. When you have such divergence of priorities and policy-making authority, you find a battle. And so we know what we must do as a civil society to address, sort of systemic wrongs that have been perpetrated against the public by law enforcement. And, I think we've reached that moment. However, there are those in Washington that have sought to use fear as a rationale for why the status quo and an acceptance of law enforcement as is important. And the fear coming from our community is that there'll be another generation of people meeting with extrajudicial executions in our cities, and we can't abide with that. So, part of what we have to do is we have to keep pushing We have to use every tactic and infiltrate, as Sister Chantel Jackson, the Assemblywoman, has stated. And that means pushing up against the US Senate, doing everything we can to connect friends and family and individuals we know in Georgia and encourage them in this moment. Because until we are able to really break up what has been happening in the United States Senate, there's going to be a foot dragging on these imperatives that we must meet in this moment. And the George Floyd Policing Accountability Act is one of those bills.
Hey Mario, if I can jump in here on this question, because this is something that that I've been working on for a long time. The state of New York was actually the first state in the country to pass a comprehensive set of police reforms after the murder of George Floyd. We passed 10 bills. 4 of them were mine, right, of the 10, including the 911 false reporting bill, a bill that requires New York State Police to have body cameras, the right to record bill, and a bill that creates a Office of Police Misconduct within the context of the Attorney General's office, right? And we did some other things. I actually wrote the very first version of 50A, right, that we passed as well. It was passed under somebody else's name, but I wrote the original version of that bill. And so I totally agree with both the Congresswoman, and certainly it would be fantastic to have some fellow response. But we have to also, kind of undergird those things also on the state level. And also agree with Assemblywoman Jackson. And by the way, Brother Anderson, I'm gonna give you some quick advice, because you haven't taken the oath of office yet. Anytime you have female colleagues saying anything, always agree with them. That's gonna help a lot in your political career. So just always begin by agreeing with them. But I really do. I agree with Assemblywoman Jackson when she talks about the fact that there is not a dichotomy between us and the police department. We have unfortunately signed up to allow an invading force of people to come into our communities and police us. Exactly because we have not saw the positions in our community of policing as being valuable in part, right? Which is why I put in a bill that is being carried by Assemblywoman Cruz as in the Assembly that creates a New York NYPD residency requirement, right? But beyond that, we're going to have to change the culture in our communities and start talking to young people in our community about policing as a viable career path for them, right? And that both will get people into the system. And the more you have, the more you can address people. And I think, Assemblywoman, that there is, I agree with you that it's not just about having officers, but you also need Blacks, Latinos, Asians, women, and Muslims in significant position in the NYPD. We have Chief Madry, who now just moved up, who's there, and also Chief Rodney Harrison. I think it's Harrison, but he's Rodney. Yeah, but he's also somebody who's signed. But yeah, we don't have enough of diversity.
Harrison and Juanita Holmes.
And yes, and Juanita Holmes, right? And so, but we need to do more on that. I saw in the chat that somebody talked about a bill that asks police officers to have their own personal insurance liability. I have a bill that does that. I have another bill that is a constitutional amendment that essentially says, with all of these dynamics where essentially wrongful death suits that we're seeing, which, by the way, cost the city of New York literally tens of millions of dollars every year. I have a bill that allows us to go after their pensions, right? And so that the first piece of money from a wrongful death comes from the pension of the officer, as opposed to just the city of New York, right? And so we believe that if we provide more accountability and transparency to the system, and that will in fact change. I just want to talk really, really quickly about 4 of the bills that I put in. One, getting rid of qualified immunity. I have a bill that does that. I have a bill that defines excessive use of force in the law. Currently, excessive use of force, when we talk about it in the state of New York, is a term of poetry, right? Because it doesn't exist as a legal term. And so we need to put some teeth into it and define it in the law. I have a bill, again, I talked about this NYPD residency requirement. And then lastly, a set of bills that creates a non-police response to homelessness and mental health crisis. The largest mental health facility in the entire country is on Rikers Island, because we are criminalizing people who are mentally ill and people who are homeless. And oftentimes those populations are the same population or similar populations, right? And you should not be criminalized because you have a mental illness. You should not be criminalized because you have drug addiction. You should not be criminalized because you have no place to live. And we have to treat that differently. We have to train people to deal with those emergency circumstances and put them there and put them in those positions to deal with that. That also frees up our law enforcement to be in a place where we need law enforcement, because we absolutely still need law enforcement at this moment. We are always building to that shining city on the hill where no cops are necessary, but this moment is not that moment. And we still need police. And so while we still need police, we ought to be freeing our police officers up to respond to the things that only police can respond to. And in these systems, in these circumstances, which you can have somebody give somebody a traffic ticket, or help address an issue with somebody who's mentally ill, let's in fact do that. And so I think there's a lot of work ahead of us in upcoming legislative session. I'm looking forward to joining all of my colleagues and all of you, frankly, in the work ahead, because it's not just us, in the state legislature, those in elected positions, but it's going to be all of us who are going to need to have boots on the ground and our hand on the grindstone.
Thank you.
Can I quickly respond before you go out of this? I just wanted to say something, and Kevin did it so well, and others on the panel. If we want to see more African Americans in the department, we got to look at the path that leads to that. I've been a professor at John Jay College since 2008, and every year less and less Black males are in my class and the classes of my colleagues. Okay, we have explorer clubs at precincts, and that it's not even properly funded. So I don't know what the plan is, but I would hope that we also begin to look at how do we enter the police department, because as we begin to look at and shape it, but if we're not present in those ranks, in those positions, that's a problem. That's a real problem. And right now, our young people who happen to be Black, I won't say brown, because at John Jay in my classes, I had a lot of brown students who were Dominican and Latino. They're going into the force big time, but we're not. And so that's something I hope that Dr. Rice and her colleagues on that committee really looks at how our young people are moving into law enforcement.
Thank you, Brother Allen, for that. And I want to honor the point of bringing in some audience questions. And you can actually come back interview one, or Senator Parker, or Congresswoman Clark, or anyone. This is from Courtney Jackson. Were newer organizations like the Movement for Black Lives and other local orgs affiliated with them invited to the table to discuss reimagining public safety? And I'll add to that, if they were invited, how so, and in what way were their perspectives included in some of your bills?
Well, actually, let me just let me jump in on this conversation about policing. I think that naturally, of course, we need to look at working to reform the system of policing. But I think the bigger picture, which we really need to put an additional focus and attention on, is reimagining what safety looks like in general. Safety doesn't always mean policing. Safety doesn't always mean that it's somebody that has a badge and some handcuffs and a gun and is going out into the community. Safety is something that we need to redefine. Safety looks like making sure that we're taking care of our folks, and we know who the bad young folks are who are struggling with behavior issues and things of that nature. We know who they are. We know who the data is, and we know because we live in these communities. We need to reimagine safety and replace policing, because it's becoming a system that's increasingly obsolete. It's becoming a system that is increasingly struggling with being able to take care of and protect and serve the groups and families and neighborhoods that it's supposed to protect and serve. So of course, the idea of policing must be reformed, but we have to look towards what safety looks like in our communities. And if we begin to imagine big and move in that direction, I think that we could change what the face of policing looks like in our neighborhoods, because we will be in that seat of making sure that our communities are safe. And it's not a crazy idea. We used to do it before. We used to have the grandmothers who looked out the window and made sure so-and-so was getting to school. We used to have the mom that stood on the street corner looking and praying around to make sure that folks are getting to where they need to be. And we used to have those systems, and we need to bring those systems back in a way that can be impactful and effectual in our communities. And lastly, I think cure violence is a way to get to achieve that, right? We have cure violence programs where we have folks who they're able to negotiate with some of the students and young people, whomever are struggling, are joining gangs. They're able to pull them out, get them a job, help them along the way, and address the root cause as to why people go into a life of crime. We have to get at the root causes, and oftentimes policing addresses the symptoms, and we need, as a community, to address the roots.
If I can, Mario, if I can answer this question very directly, for me, the answer has been yes. And it's not just been civil rights groups. Believe it or not, I started my journey on dealing with the issue of police reform over 10 years ago. And I actually started up, believe it or not, working in the Muslim community, right? So, you know, me and Yvette represent a community in Ditmas Park and part of Kensington, primarily Pakistani, but it's one of the largest Muslim populations in the entire city of New York. And so it was really in the moments in which they were being targeted by the NYPD that a lot of this conversation started for me. And I realized as I was taking their complaints and hearing their concerns that it was the same kind of concerns that I was hearing in Black communities and Latino communities. And then that's when I first started working on the issues around 50A special prosecutor, when I started looking at how do we in fact manage some of the intelligence communities within the intelligence units that literally are spying on our communities, right? I mean, like, you know, we have some of you who are historians may be familiar with COINTELPRO. We have COINTELPRO within the context of the NYPD, you know, for years, right? And that's where a lot of these issues were born. And so I have worked with groups like Freedom March NYC, people like Tamika Mowry, you know, Arc of Justice with my man Kirsten Foy, you know, and so I've had you know, I've talked to, you know, your president and CEO Arva Rice about many of these issues, and so I have, and you know, I'm a longtime member of the NAACP. I'm a member of the Urban League too, by the way, but I'm a longtime member as well of the NAACP. And I've been talking to people like my president in Brooklyn, L. Joy Williams, and Hazel Dukes about these issues. And so this is not something that has just come about in the last 7 to 8 months after the murder of George Floyd. These have been conversations that have been going on. But I have talked to many of the younger, newer advocates about some of this work, and still open. I mean, the bills are not set in stone. They're only bills. We can always change them. And so if there's advocates out there who are interested in this work, I suggest they reach out to me and or other members of the state legislature and start working with them. And then to address Assemblyman Anderson's point, I agree with him. And I think that we have to start addressing the issues of our young people. I don't know if the cure of violence programs are big enough to deal with all their problems, but we have to choke off the lifeline to these gangs in our community. And I think we do that first by introducing, and I'll give the mayor credit for beginning this, but we haven't gone far enough in terms of you know, getting away from teaching to the test in our public schools, adding more music, art, athletics, and dance as regular parts of the curriculum to engage our young people. We need more school-based athletics, both junior varsity and varsity. You know, again, the mayor did a great job around universal pre-K and introducing 3K in terms of, you know, getting young people to learn earlier. But we now need to make after school universal. We have buildings that are empty in our communities from 3 p.m. to 7 a.m. and we need universal after school. And that's one of the things that we have to really make sure happens, and expand beacon schools. I like beacon school model as opposed to the community school model, because beacon schools are family-based models as opposed to child-based models. We need to use children as access points into families, because social workers like Chantel Jackson understand that you can't educate young people outside of the context of their families. And so it has to be a wraparound model, it has to be comprehensive, and it has to put families at the center of the analysis. And I think Beacon schools do a better job at doing that. And I think once we start doing those things, we then have a lot more control over what our young people are doing. And then we have Cure Violence on top of that, and programs like Man Up, you know, and others, you know, Life Camp out in Queens, my girl Erica Ford, now can come in and do their thing and not be bailing out the ocean, right? Because the population becomes a manageable population. But we have to do a better job at shutting off the supply lines into these gangs, and that's causing some of the disruptions in terms of crime and violence in our communities.
Parker, thank you for that very thorough and specific answer to that question. I've been told it's time to wrap up. Clearly, this conversation could go on for another hour, and I think that shows the Urban League that this needs to be a regular thing as we go into this new session. Just want to end it with the last snappy 30-second round of answers from each of you, ideally. What can everyday people do to help you get these pieces of legislation passed, and the legislation that is passed, making sure that agencies are executing it as it was intended? So 30 seconds from each of you, and that'll be our last question. Then I'll turn it over to Danny Nicholson to wrap us up.
I'll just say, get involved at your level. I put in the chat, if you need to join your community board, join your police council board, just get involved at your level. Join a campaign of a person who speaks how you speak and will push the values and morals that you push. Also, join in at your make sure you know who your legislators are. Let's start there. Know who those people are and hold them accountable. You put them in office, make sure they're speaking for you and your community.
All right, thank you.
And to piggyback and agree with what Chantel said, know who we are, but also know what we do. I can't stress enough, you know, folks thinking that we can do things on the state level as it relates to immigration. That's often a federal thing, generally, right? You know, pothole city, things like that. Just kind of know what we do so that you're not disappointed if we can't deliver because it's not our area. That's important too. And I think that another piece of advice as well, you know, I won my seat and just another friendly amendment to Senator Parker. A month in office. I was sworn in on November 12th.
That's right. I apologize. My apologies.
Pull your bow tie. No. But another friendly amendment. I'm sorry. Another piece of advice. Is get involved again in your civics and get involved in the groups. And if there's not a group, create one. That's important, right? You know, the folks on my block, we had a shooting like right in front of my house this summer. And the folks on the block said, this is not gonna be the norm. We're going to create a block association. And so far, 30 or 40 people have been a part of that block association, and they've been able to begin the process of addressing speeding, speed bumps, and every other smaller issue in the neighborhood. And that's what y'all need to be doing. If it's not an elected journey, then it has to be a journey around community organizing and supporting your neighbors. And that's a fight that any and everyone can get involved in.
Thank you, Brother Anderson. Congresswoman Clark, can we get you in here?
Absolutely. And I just want to, first of all, say thank you so much to Arva and a team at the New York Urban League. Let me thank Assemblywoman Chantel Jackson, Assemblyman Khalil, and Senator Parker for sharing sort of their insights. I take and absorb and agree with all that has been discussed. And I would want to add to the organizing piece. And I think that's the challenge for Black communities, is that so many others sacrifice the time, oftentimes time that we don't have, but time that we have to make. And it is a sacrifice to organize, to present demands. I can tell you right here in the 9th District of New York, I have constituents that set up meetings with me. They know when I'm in New York City versus when I'm in Washington, D.C. And I have other constituents that, you know, I essentially am the embodiment of their dreams, their aspirations that never come to meet with me. And so I think that it's not just the meetings with me, it's the engaging in conversation and the organizing that builds the momentum for change. And we're in a change moment. So I want to encourage everyone, even if you start a Google group where you're online and you all agree to, to move on a particular item that's so imperative to the community, it can be done. And I can tell you that the most progress that we have made as a people has been because of our movement. So don't, I understand that we're in a pandemic. I want everyone to stay safe, stay healthy, stay strong, and stay blessed, and wear their masks, but use whatever platforms you have available to you to keep the dialogue going and to stay behind the elected officials that are moving to get things done. Because we cannot go back to a post or a pre-COVID existence. We must center ourselves in a new post-COVID existence. Thank you.
Brother Allen, how about you? Jump in here.
Thank you very much. And certainly I'm happy to be here with the legislators. And I just want to always remind people that we have political parties. And you're right, power don't sit. You let your power sit, somebody's going to come up and take it. And so as a Democratic district leader, I know what that power is in terms of selection of judges in this town and how those things are done. And often sometimes we're unaware of the different community boards, district leaders, county committee, judicial delegates. There's so many roles that people can play in our power movement. And so I strongly believe that in our community, we have to do education, political and economic education. We have to understand our money and how it can be leveraged, and we have to understand our politics and how it can be leveraged. For example, Kevin Parker just gave a lesson to Khalil Anderson 30 minutes ago. Khalil Anderson, Senator Parker, followed your advice as his professor. He gave props to Chantel Jackson. So it's not that we can't not learn. Apparently we can learn. So imagine if we take a lot more folks in our community and begin to really educate them on their power and say, listen, at the end of the day, you have a choice of how you use your power. And if you either can talk about it or you can do something with it. And I just truly believe that if we exercise our power in our own communities, change will come. And that's why Congressman Clark says it's all about movement, not just about talk.
Speaking of Assemblywoman Jackson, can we get you in here?
Oh, I started us off. I don't think Senator Parker went.
Oh, that's my apologies. All right, Senator Parker.
That's because you knew I've talked enough on this call. We have
Bring us home strong. Bring us home strong.
We have gotten to this. We have gotten to the point of the program where everything has been said. Everybody just hasn't said it yet. And so let me say that I agree with my colleagues, all of them, when they talk about begin where you are. Think about politics as a process and not just an event. And so it is both, if you're interested in electoral politics, not just voting for a candidate, but helping finding candidates, helping them raise money, helping them canvass, helping them reach out to the community and doing that work. If you live in an apartment, join the tenant association. If there is no tenant association, as you heard Assemblyman Anderson talk about, start one. If there's no, join your block association. If there's no block association, start a block association. Your mosque, church, temple, whatever the religious formation you belong to, join a ministry and be active in the ministry in that religious formation. If there isn't one that you're interested in, talk to the clergy leader about starting that ministry in your church, mosque, synagogue, whatever, right? Many of you obviously are already involved with the Urban League Young Professionals. Recruit more of your friends to be involved, right? join your NAACP branch. There's lots of organizations. Stokely Carmichael, who created SNCC, wrote the book Black Power, said that part of our problem as Black people is that we have organizations, but our organizations aren't organized, right? So we have to make sure that we're engaged in our organizations, because it's really only the organizational thrust that gets us there, right? And so what we saw in the historic civil rights movement is organizations like the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and organizations like SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, right? CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, right? The Deacons of Defense, stepping up to do work in our community. And now it's, Black Lives Matter, right? Now it's Freedom March NYC and others, right? Warriors in the Garden, right? Right? And so, but this notion of organizational development is absolutely critical. But we have to make sure our organizations are organized, and we have to make sure that there's conversation and engagement at every single level. And so again, I want to thank you all. I want to tell everybody to remember, we are the people who were here the day before yesterday, and we're going to be the people who are going to be here the day after tomorrow. So let's all of us continue to bring good into the world and let no good be lost. Thank you, Mario.
Kevin, did you mention Nan?
I did in the chat. I threw it in the chat.
I'm gonna tell Reverend, you didn't mention us.
Don't
you come up to us on MLK Day?
I'm a member of NAN too, by the way.
Okay. Well, thank you all for
take your ticket.
Thank you all for being here tonight and taking time out of your busy schedules to share the knowledge and perspective that you all have. It's been a pleasure being able to moderate this conversation. Again, my name is Mario Rosser. And with that being said, I'll hand it back over to the wonderful organizers who put tonight together, Danielle Nicholson.
Thank you, Mario. I just want to thank all of the panelists, all of the guests, Arva, Mario. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We hope that it was educational and also inspirational. As Kevin Parker already mentioned, we have our link tree. Please join YP. Please follow us for future events, and we hope to see you soon. Have a great night, everyone.